Hello everybody, today our group will present an analysis of the graphic novel The Prince and the Dressmaker by Jen Wang.
Let's talk about the author. The author of The Prince and the Dressmaker is Jen Wang. She was born on March 22 in 1984. She's an American cartoonist, writer, and illustrator based in Los Angeles. Wang has published graphic books, including Coco Be Good in Real Life with Cory Doctorow and The Prince and the Dressmaker. Wang is a co-founder and organizer for Los Angeles-based comics festival, Comic Arts LA. Jen's work has been published in Adventure Time and LA Magazine.
About the work. The Prince and the Dressmaker is a graphic novel written and illustrated by Jen Wang. It was published on February 13 in 2018 by First Second Books, at a length of 288 pages. This is Wang's second graphic novel. The book has been well received by critics who have compared it thematically to Cinderella. The Prince and the Dressmaker won the Happy Award for Best Children or Young Adult Book in 2018 and the Eisner Award for Best Publication for Teens from the age of 13 to 17 in 2019. Film rights to The Prince and the Dressmaker were purchased in April 2018 by Universal Pictures. Wang wrote the character of Sebastian Crustalia, someone who identifies with different modes of gender expression and is comfortable alternating between both, masculine and feminine. Wang originally wrote both Francis and Sebastian as older characters, but adapted the characters to be teenagers, which she realized heightened the stakes of the characters' realizations about themselves.
The Prince and the Dressmaker tell the story of the Prince Sebastian, who dresses as the glamorous Lady Crustalia at night, and his seamstress Francis, who befriends the prince and hopes to make his maker on the wheel of fashion. This story begins with a royal invitation to attend Prince Sebastian's 16th birthday party in Paris. This party was organized by Sebastian's parents, so he can meet women so that he can later get married. The aristocratic ladies from all over the city clamor for new dresses and perfect hair for the dance. Because of this, a young woman is forced to go to the dance. So, she and her mother have a new dress made for the clothing store, where Frances works, and she takes on the task of creating a new dress. Frances spends all night creating an avant-garde dress to defy social expectation and make the young woman stand out at the celebration. After the dance, an stranger went to ask Frances to design beautiful dresses, but behind this, it was not a woman, but it was Prince Sebastian who wanted to hire her. After the truth is revealed, the two come to an agreement. Frances will keep Sebastian's secret and design her dresses, while he pays her handsomely and helps her realize her dream of being a true designer. The fashion adventure begins. Frances created the first dress for Sebastian, which always helped to become a new person, and the person she always felt she was inside. He transformed into the Lady Crustalia. As time passes, Frances created more dresses for Sebastian, and this makes them more united, and it makes Lady Crustalia a fashion trend and allowing us to show more of Frances' work and open new paths for her. But of surprise, a Christmas happened with the father of Sebastian. Because of this, he felt pressured and afraid that his new identity will be revealed. So that, when he decides to fight Francis to keep his identity a secret, and this causes conflict between the two of them. But despite everything, Sebastian's secret is revealed, and his parents learn that he liked to wear dresses, show, and a wig. This destroys Sebastian's feeling, so he decides to run away. This causes his parents' sadness. But in the end, everything changes. His parents accept him as he is. The king demonstrates his acceptance by helping him in the parade for Francis, and she demonstrates her feelings for him. Sebastian lives happily in his own way, feeling the love of his parents and Francis.
Now we are going to mention the themes the Prince and the Dressmaker mentions. Self-discovery. Youth is an age where adolescents want to discover their interest and what makes them happy. Young love. When young people start to build relationships from feelings and emotion to others. Social economic status. Doing an effort to stand out in society can put you in a better position. Art, passion. Many adolescents have a gift that they want to exploit and demonstrate, but sometimes there are obstacles that prevent them to do it. Family. It is difficult to agree on some beliefs and ideas when there are absent parents who do not take care about their children. We will develop those topics in depth into the analysis. To have a better comprehension and interpretation about the story, we make an analysis based on theory. The Prince and the Dressmaker is a graphic novel that presents a complex piece of text that covers the whole storyline in one book. It includes images and short pieces of text which gives you cues to follow the story. It is read from left to right and from up to down. In the story, we find graphic elements such as the layout is the configuration of all the elements on the page. In other words, it is the way that the elements are arranged. The panel, the book that contains the image and text. It determines the flow and movement of the story by giving the reader cues as to what their eyes should follow next. The frame is the border that surrounds and contains the panel. The gutter is the space that lies between panels. The speech bubble, it contains the dialogue spoken by different characters. Here we can find other elements. The lead, when the image goes beyond the borders of the page. For instance, it is the example of the lady and Prince Sebastian that greet each other cordially. On the other hand, we have the graphic weight. It is the visual focus when the element of the image is more salient, it is more intensive. For example, we can notice that the two dancers are in first plane, and in the other example, even the boys are in the back. The image of them is more salient than the others. It is the most common example that we can see in the story, the special sound effects, words that give a sense of sound on the page. For example, when Frances throws the clothes on the floor because of her anger, or when the young ladies scream of excitement for going to Prince Sebastian's birthday. Another element is the close-up, the angle that zooms into an image. This technique is sometimes employed to convey a feeling of intimacy between the reader and character. Here, we observe that Prince Sebastian turns nervous at the moment when people ask for his name, or when Francis is surprised about what Emily tells her, or finally when the lady looks at her dressed surprisingly.
The relationship between words and pictures in The Prince and the Dressmaker. If we make an analysis of The Prince and the Dressmaker, we can say that this graphic novel shows an enhancement kind of word-picture relationship. This means that the words in the pictures extend or expand on each other's meaning. It is noticeable through the story, where we can notice how the pictures extend the meaning of the words through the characters' body language and facial expressions, and how the words extend the meaning of the pictures, stating specific details that are impossible to denote only with pictures. In the following image, we can see how the graphic novel conveys some specific pieces of information through text, like the fact that the prince is going to be 16 soon. So the text in this part makes things easier to be understood and expand the picture's meaning, while the pictures do the same thing with the text. Here we can see how a simple thing like a name only can be conveyed through text, and how the picture gives us a more specific context, showing us Crustalia's happy smile. In the following screenshots, the pictures show us how terrified is Crustalia at first, but then we can appreciate the determination in her face. These expressions expand pretty well the context that words gave us, and it is a good example of why this graphic novel shows us an enhancement kind of word-picture relationship most of the time.
Reading images. In order to analyze a graphic novel, we must take into account all the elements that can be observed in it, because each one of these have different meanings, which makes the novel even more interesting and complex. The graphic novel The Prince and the Dressmaker leads us to make an analysis about how we interpret graphics and about the meaning of those graphics. Objects. The veil that the prince wears on his head represents the way in which he hides who he really is. The antlers worn by the king in the parade symbolize power, strength, and authority. The wardrobe not only keeps the clothes, but also the secrets of the prince. Size. We see the poster of the prince stuck on the wall that is giant next to the women who look at him from below. Setting. The monastery on top of a mountain represents a place of peace and tranquility for the prince. The store where the women are sewing clothes represents the working class. The palace where the king lives represents royalty. Color. The yellow color represents optimism and happiness as we see in the image. The orange color in the wig symbolizes strength and endurance, and it is associated with joy. Position. In the ball we can see the royal family in the center of the image because they are the ones with power, and to these sides are the rest of the people. The palace in the center represents the power of royalty. Direction. Front-facing paintings show how important it is to the royal family that the prince follow the path of his ancestors. Angle. The king looks down from the throne at the prince with disapproval, and the prince looks at the king with shame from the floor. Light. We can see the prince sitting in a gloomy room, which highlights his sadness. We see a bright day with bright colors, which helps to perceive the joy of the characters. You can see a dark street surrounded by fog, which adds a touch of mystery to the image. Body language. Just by looking at the image, you can see the nerves of the prince in front of the lady because of the perspiration that falls down his face. It is seen that the prince feels embarrassed by the clothes he is wearing because of the way he crosses his hands, his posture, and his gestures. Clothes. The lady with the black dress represents the rebellion and bravery of women in a conservative era. We can clearly see the upper class with their luxurious and extravagant dresses, and the lower class with their simple clothes. It is seen that the relation dress has a very special meaning because it represents the butterfly that comes out of its cocoon. It is a symbol of liberation. On this image, we see the prince wearing the clothes that the knights used at that time, but it is the first time that he does it by choice to go out with Frances.
Hello, I'm going to talk about the first level of deep viewing, which is literal observation. Taking into account the question what is pictured, we can notice that The Prince and the Dressmaker is a graphic novel. Regarding the language, it is very formal, as we can see in this extract from the novel. It is also present the use of some French words such as pardon, and there is special effect sounds. If we take into account culture and context, we can see that the story is located in Paris in a past time. If we look at the images, we can see that the buildings are really old, as well as the clothes and transport. If we talk about the space, the story is presented in an organized way. It is presented from the left to right, so the audience can have a better reading. Regarding information in the graphic novel, it is seen that there are more visual information rather than printed. There are pages in which there aren't any words at all, and others in which there are a lot of written information. In the picture number 1, we can see that there is only graphic information, but in picture number 2, there is a graphic information as well as speech bubbles.
This is the second level of the deep viewing analysis, and it's called interpretation. We think that the most important objects are presented in the relationship between Francis and Sebastian, and we are talking about their friendship and the events they go through. The story shows a fairy tale with a happy ending that is rather a cliché, and all the objects and how they look have meaning, like the color used, from dark to lighter tones depending on the situation. We think that the message of self-discovery and young love are showed explicitly, but the cultural background and context is not well explained. This is the third level of the deep viewing analysis, and it's called evaluation and interpretation. We think that all the objects and characters that the story shows seems to fit perfectly to give us the message that the author wanted. We think that the ages of Sebastian and Francis can easily approach to the one who's reading the story. Also, the way the fairy tale looks contributes to it, because of the colors used and the characters' drawings. The message of self-discovery, confidence and happiness is very important nowadays and could be easily used in any context. And the use of the formal language helps to catch the attention of a wider range of readers. And the story is presented in a very organized way. Last but not least, it is culturally blazed, because it shows events that couldn't end that way because of the cultural and historical background. We can say that if we move the story to the present, it will fit better.
Narration and pacing. Narration. The Prince and the Dressmaker is considered young adult literature. The first page or two demands readers' attention, enticing them to read on. This fairy tale is narrated from the first person point of view, which gives readers a look into the mind of the character that is near the reader's age and allows them to make a better connection and be more invested in the story. It is also important voice. Young adult novels often have characters which use slangs. The illustrations are simple and cartoonish. The tones used at the beginning of the story are clear tones that the ones when Francis starts making dresses for Sebastian. Pacing. On the prince and the dressmaker is visible how Sebastian's gender and pronouns were handled. Despite Sebastian's parents using he, him pronouns, the other characters that are close to Sebastian refrain from using pronouns for the most part.
Self discovery. Self discovery and identity are concepts that are evident in the story. Sebastian finds his true meaning in his mother's dresses. He feels completely happy and free when he wears them. It is there that he finds his true personality, his true self. So when he meets Francis, he knows that she can help him discover how powerful he can feel by wearing clothes designed according to his tastes and expectations. Young love. Young love is another point that develops throughout the novel. Sebastian and Francis are two teenagers who are experiencing love for the first time. Experiences that blush, that immobilize, that assail, but also feel pleasant and necessary. This is why feelings are lived more intensely and cannot be limited to the pressures of others, because inside them, this feeling is pure, and they are building by themselves a way of loving that cannot be betrayed to please others. Social economic. As far as the socio-economic aspect is concerned, two different realities can be observed. Sebastian, a prince who has everything he wants, and on the other hand, there is Francis, a dressmaker who earns her living sewing in a workshop, dreaming since childhood to become a great designer recognized and respected by her references whom she admires. The work that Francis does is done with total commitment and dedication that allow her to obtain positions in recognized stores as well as the standard of living that she deserves, and as a result feel fulfilled and valued. Art and passion. Art and passion are two elements that can be perceived in this story. Francis' talent for sewing and design, Sebastian's taste for fashion, music, and theater are concepts that are perfectly intertwined so that both can develop their best performances when it comes to embarking on an adventure together that always has fashion as the main stage, which is completed with a true friendship between them. This gift that Francis possesses could not have been discovered working from anonymity. All that was needed was the possibility of making that talent visible. Family. The family plays a very important role in this plot, since Sebastian is subject to follow the precepts and mandates that are imposed on him as a prince and future heir to the throne. This makes Sebastian hide his tastes and preferences from his parents and pretends to like activities he does not enjoy, to like meet people who he is not interested in. He feels forced to please others by relegating his own happiness, happiness that can only be full in anonymity. It also shows, in spite of everything, the love of a parent for a child overcomes any barrier that does not allow the happiness of each other.
Content. Although this graphic novel allows us to realize that literature is advancing and involving more current issues, we can, at the same time, see how the typical common fairy tale is broken into a much more different one, where it tries to involve a slightly unconventional and slightly irreverent to the perception and acceptance of many. Since it is since modified the typical conception of the fairy tales. The good things about this story is that it is the good involving gender identity a bit, but it in itself it allows us to observe more about the power of the acceptance of believing in yourself and not being true to who you are, which this type of content are very necessary for today's young people and that are very current themes.
The title of this graphic novel, The Prince and the Dressmaker, at first glance might seem like a repeated story of the poor girl and the rich young man. But behind this, we find a relationship of friendship and complicity rarely seen. The Prince of the Crown resorts to a humble dressmaker to help him get what he wants to feel complete. And she becomes his best friend, who sacrifices her dream to keep his secret, and she's the only woman who loves and accepts him as he is. Conclusion. Once the Prince and the Dressmaker is an outstanding graphic novel with delightful illustrations and amazingly warm story. Not only deals with the sacrifices we often make for our friends, and how sometimes we ask our friends for an effort to enable us from avoiding important decisions. It is a positive message that no one really should care what makes people happy if we love them made this book incredibly awesome.